Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar on returning to work safely. This presentation was prepared by Terry Fisher and Martin Little, and I'm just going to be delivering it for them today. My name's Jude. I'm one of the lead assessors for 9001, 14001 and 45001, which are the standards which are really going to be covered over the next 20-30 minutes of the webinar. You are able to put questions into the chat box, and there will be a question and answer at the end. It's difficult for me to see them come up, so it's likely that I will wait till the end to answer those. And then at the end of the webinar, you will get an email of all of the slides and the recording as well. It may be later this week, but you will most certainly get a copy of it. So who are NQA? Well, we're a global certification body who certificate to 9, 14 and 45,000. And the purpose of the webinar really is just to help you in, I suppose, a checklist kind of way to ensure that you're doing everything that would meet the standards of ISO in ensuring that your processes are going to be recorded correctly and ensuring that there's more of a confidence really and reassurance for your staff as they return to work in hopefully a safe manner. So the processes that we'll be looking to think about during the webinar will be your context, your leadership, planning, legislative changes, the support functions, operations, performance evaluation, and of course the goal of all ISO is how we're improving all of these items as we go. We'll also talk a little bit about the COVID secure guideline verification, which is a new verification that we're offering as a result of COVID really. Again, just to sort of give confidence. There's a lot of fear about it at the moment with returning to work and visiting sites and premises for business, which we all used to do so freely and easily, but we'll come on to that later on. So this is just a slide really to give you a little bit of context for where we operate in the world and sort of how we're ranked as well. I'm quite proud of the fact that we are ranked #1 in a couple of places there. So it probably hasn't escaped you that businesses have changed in the last 4 months, and the operation through COVID-19 and its associated restrictions has caused a massive spectrum of some places have had to shut down completely and some places have never been busier. But what's certainly been the same for all of us is that our business and working practices have changed to some extent, some dramatically, some not so much. But regardless of that, change has taken place, and it's how we monitor those changes and see where the improvements have come. And during the process of this webinar, whether the changes have been safe is the important part today. You probably find that if you've had a lot of staff furloughed, most certainly, then it's going to be quite a shock coming back to work because their routines have completely changed. And the idea behind the ISO certifications and the management systems is that the tools that you sort of forced to use in order to get your certification are really good ways of ensuring that your workplace is prepared and following a logical process. So the webinar is designed to highlight some of the changes you might have had to make to your management systems so it can support you in the fundamental business changes that might be needed to ensure a safe return to work for staff and customers. So what we've done is we've broken these changes down and grouped them against the relevant sections of the ISO standards. So this isn't just pertinent to 9001, we are covering 14 and 45 within this as well. So ISO standards are a logical and progressive way. So if we look at 9001, it's purely a standard of logical business practice which we would measure you against and assess to see have you met that international standard. And it's generally stuff that most people would do anyway. And the idea of the assessment is to come along and see, what are you saying you do? Are you doing what you're saying? And is it a logical progression which works within that standard? Environment and health and safety are really important at the moment as well, important anyway. And they're really quite technical, if you will, bolt-ons onto the 9001. So they all share similar identities and similar requirements, but hopefully you'll find what we've identified useful in order to ensure that you're doing what you can to ensure your staff, your visitors and your customers are safe. So it shouldn't really require you to make massive changes from a process point of view, but we shall start with the basics. So when we're looking at the context of the organisation, what we're really looking at is, who are we? What are our issues? What do we do? Who are our interested parties, and what should the scope of the management system be? So the fundamental issue, I suppose, for most of us at the moment is that, where are we, and what are we now doing? Have we had to change anything? Do we need to change anything? Have our interested parties changed? So what most people would have in general is customers, suppliers, staff, insurance companies. You might now need to add interested parties such as the health and safety executive or the environmental agency. Even if you haven't got the health and safety standard, you might just want to sort of consider that the health and safety executive are dropping in without appointment, I believe, in some places. And of course, you would need to satisfy those as an interested party. Your scope might have changed. So for the next 6 months, there might be a part of your system which we would come out and assess that isn't going to be in operation for maybe 6 months. It might be a quarter of a year, or you might have actually adapted it, so you're changing your product or your service to accommodate something extra. So it comes back to, who are we, what do we do, and should we look at changing that scope? And you're welcome to give us a call and see if the scope that you have currently in operation is still suitable for you, or if we need to make a minor change for the foreseeable future. So of course, your leadership aspect is going to control all of this, really. Your top management, who are accountable for the effectiveness of the system, are going to look at that starting point, hopefully, and see where we're at now. So we've done a couple of webinars on leadership and planning. The next one is delivered by myself, and that's at 2 o'clock on the 21st of August. That's part 2 to the leadership webinars that we've done already. And we'll be diving into this in a bit more greater depth. But just as an overview, the leadership are going to ensure that required changes are made and incorporated into the daily running of all processes. So you might find you're in the middle of carnage at the moment, to all intents and purposes, because we're trying to implement new safety systems, we're trying to identify any issues, we're trying to identify what's working, and on top of that, meet customer demand and staff demand. So it's quite an interesting time, not without its challenges, certainly. We're going to talk quite a bit about resources through this webinar as well. Again, it's a leadership function to ensure that all of the resources required to be deployed to management and the system can be effectively provided, and that the roles and responsibilities for completing all the processes activities are clearly assigned. Once we've got those basics covered, we can start looking at how we're going to plan. So risks and opportunities for all 3 standards really are facing a system review. New risks and opportunities should really be identified, and there are lots of opportunities available, although some places are facing sort of a challenging time, others are booming, and it's a case of how you're going to plan. Is this going to continue forever? If we're having a bit of a drier spell, we need to be planning to ensure that we're creating opportunities so that we can recover quite significantly and have that measured recovery strategy. And if we are booming at the moment, we also need to plan how long is that going to last and what do we need to forecast. How can we reserve resources to ensure that when that change may occur again, that we can still significantly survive on that. You might find that your organisational objectives have changed as well, so you might want to plan to realign them. They may be resource-based, they may be simply that you want to carry out more internal audits through the year so that you can continue to find out what's actually changing within the business and within the processes. It's entirely up to yourselves, but it's really a fantastic positive time to have a look. What do we want to achieve this year? And it might even be, what do you want to achieve this quarter? All we will do is look at how you've come to those objectives. How have you monitored them, and have you made them realistic objectives as well? Once we've gone through the planning of changes, excuse me, once all the above's been done, then the planning of any required changes can begin. So it'll be key in managing your resources in order to prepare your organisation for returning to work safely. So this is where we are going to talk a little bit in terms of what resources are, what we're going to need, and how they're going to be effectively distributed as well. Allocating necessary resources is quite an issue. I've personally heard on audits of people struggling to get materials. So the staff are ready to go, the customers are waiting, but getting the actual material to fulfill what they would do is being a bit of a challenge. So we need to measure that slightly and have a look at when suppliers are going to be ready. Have we got a good communication going with customers? We're not just leaving them hanging, and ensuring that we're in that strong position from a product point of view, that we have everything necessary. We need to ensure we've got the required people. So through the furlough stage, if you've had any staff furloughed, they might not be ready to come back to work. You might be unsure of, have you got enough work for them? So you'll need to have a look at the government changes with furlough as well to ensure that, you know, are you meeting the requirements of that agreement in terms of, do they need to come back part-time? Do you need to change people over? It's a good place to start to ensure that you know who is actually going to be in the business, and have you got the right skill mix within that business, and can they return safely? We need to ensure that people have got the right level of knowledge and awareness and competence that they need to work safely, and that channels of communication and effective documents are all information and necessarily available to people. So if you've had people that have been out of the business for a while, it might be worth creating a new induction. So the business has changed slightly, even if it's a simple process of only one person's allowed in the kitchen to make a cup of tea. That's a significant change. So you'll need to provide some sort of training and awareness, even a questionnaire of measure the competence that people have actually understood what the changes are. If you've done all of these effectively, then hopefully operations will take care of themselves, ensuring that the changes to your health and safety management system are managed effectively. So we hear a few stories along the way of risk assessments being done and people coming back to work, and we've done all we can, but we need to monitor that as well. So as soon as people get back into their day-to-day job and they're performing the operations, that their habits of how we've lived forever in the workplace are quite easily going to come back into play. So we're asking quite a lot of people to say, right, okay, you've been out of work for a while, or we've been in work, but we've changed your practices several times, so we don't expect any slip-ups or any breaches of the health and safety. It's likely to happen, so it's quite important that we monitor that these good practices that we've put in place and communicated to people are actually being followed up on. We're next going to monitor and measure performance as needed. I'm going to use internal audits to check how well everyone is working in line with any changes. So possibly different to the way we would normally do it in terms of quality, where we are assessing, does the system support your product and your service? We're also now looking more into that support and communication and awareness. And of course, if you've got environment or health and safety standard of which you're certified to, then your internal audit process may have to change again and become more of a deeper tool, which is a good thing, because of course it's forcing you to just look and improve that slightly more. We're going to use management review to monitor the change process and take any actions necessary to keep everybody safe. So when you're documenting your management review, some people do it various ways. Some people do really good, long, lengthy ones. Other people will have a checklist to see when they've performed an action and completed something. But it might be worth, within your management review, maybe providing a rationale of how you've come to some conclusions with your actions to keep people safe. A lot of feedback that we get is that not all the government guidelines are coherent enough. Some can be quite subjective. So if you're wanting to implement a more robust system than what the government have advised, you might want to talk about your rationale. It's up to you. The more information you can give your auditor, of course, the better assessment we can provide you and the better feedback we can provide you with as well. You might find that you're going to improve in places. I would hope that you would find that you will improve in places, even if it's just a case of we've found that we can improve better with the employees, communication, levels of trust. All of these factors produce a more effective production and business. And you might, again, when you look at your objectives, whether it's quality, environmental health and safety, can we link all of this together and find some very valuable objectives which will help us move forward in the future? So Terry and Martin have very helpfully made distinctions for your ease in terms of the different standards. So black is going to apply to all 3 standards. Where it's written in red is going to apply to health and safety. Green is going to apply to environment and energy, and blue is going to apply to quality. So if you haven't done something like this already, it's a really good idea when you get these slides to use them as a little checklist just to go through. And if you decided that you wanted to make notes on these to show us evidence of what you've done, then that's absolutely great. So as we spoke about earlier, as the context of the client's organisation changed, who are we, what do we do, and what are our issues? Have all internal and external issues been identified? Do we have any new issues to consider? So audits that I've seen over the last few months, this is an area which can get slightly ignored. It can fall into risk, you know, that section when we discuss it with people, of course. But most of you in most industries will have found that some internal and external issues have changed. If not, the list has become longer. So what do we mean by that? The internal issues, for example, might be if you've got a small premises, how people are mobile around that, or if you've only got perhaps one hand washing station, you would need to then consider how we bring this up to a better standard, whether it's providing more hand sanitizer or staggering breaks, however you want to do it, because you'll be doing your own risk assessment to find the answer to that. These are the issues that we need to consider. Have our interested parties changed, and are there new interested parties relating to our business? Hopefully there will be, because if we just say that customers are one of our interested parties, wouldn't it be nice if we could find new customer as our interested parties, or perhaps people who've dropped off the radar a little bit that we've had relationships with, is now the time to start digging deep into that. And off the back of that, you may find you have more interested parties as well. This is an area often neglected. So have we completely identified all the wants, needs and expectations of our interested parties? So what I can tell you from what I've heard of companies that I've audited, the most significant expectation of interested parties in terms of COVID is instruction. Business would like a transparency of how you're managing COVID. People want to feel safe. They want to know what your facility is like. If you going on site, for example, if you're in construction and there's lots of subcontractors, there's been furious exchanges of have we got everybody's paperwork and risk assessments. And what's nice actually is it's given people an opportunity to share a best practice, because some have come back and said, well, yours is much better than mine, we'll change ours. The other part of that, of course, is it does hold things up if you're waiting for one person's information. Don't forget your staff are also one of your interested parties, so it may be the case that you need a consultation with them to find out what they expect from you as leadership or as an employer. And potentially your insurance company as well might want to have a little chat about what they would expect, or anything that you can do to protect the company a little better to ensure they'll cover you. SWOT and PESTLE are lovely little tools. So they're quite simple ways of breaking down your business and looking at what's strong, what's weak, what's an opportunity, what's a threat, anything political or economic, sociable. And instead of just writing it down, it might be an opportunity to really analyse how these integrate and affect with your current situation. Again, as your scope changed, we've spoken about that already. Do you now have clauses that can be justifiably excluded or previously excluded but now fall within scope? So again, we spoke earlier about you might not be using a certain element of your scope for 6 months or so. This is a good time to have a look. It's not likely that we would just exclude a main party of business which is likely to come back in the next few weeks, but it's a good idea to contact the NQA team and have a chat with them and see if there's anything that we can do to encourage you to either exclude or extend your scope. Do we now need to update documented information within the system to detail the above? So any changes we've done there, it is likely that you would need to document that. And even if it's a case of you've done it through management review, you can show us that you've considered it, you can show us that you've talked about it, unless of course it's pertinent to your scope, which of course you would absolutely have to document. So if your scope's changing, then your processes are likely to change. And again, you would likely have documented safe system of work. It's likely that you would have some form of instruction to people that is documented. If it's not, and you're doing it all on verbal training instruction, then how are you going to show us it? That's always the danger, isn't it, of not documenting it. How do you show a third party that you've actually considered and fulfilled this obligation? Do we need to allocate additional resources to our processes? So again, resources is really coming to the forefront. It might be a case of investment. It might be a case of bringing extra staff in some cases with certain specialisms or technical abilities to ensure that what you're doing is in the best interest of everybody and the safest. Do we need to assign new or additional roles and responsibilities to our people to deliver our processes as planned? And some of these roles and responsibilities may only be in place in short term whilst COVID is affecting our lives daily, and some might be in needing to be in place permanently. So how do we deal with a short-term role? To start with, you might want to put somebody as a support contact. You might want to train people as health and safety representatives. There's lots of different roles which there's just too many to go through in a very short space of time. But again, this is going to come back to performance and measurement. Do you need this as a long-term thing? And if you decide that support is needed, you might decide that there's a full-time requirement to put somebody on a mental health first aiders course or increase the number of first aiders. It's a big subject, but again, we'll dive deeper into that in Leadership Part 2 on the 21st of August. As top management effectively communicated their roles and responsibilities and provided training where necessary, this is an area where we're not really seeing too much evidence. So people are communicating, these are the changes. You get a sheet of paper that we've read and understood, and people will sign the name. What's sort of missing from that is the follow-up of, have we monitored it? Have we ensured that the communication was effective? It's often when people sign the name and say, yes, I've understood that they haven't, or they have, and then they've forgotten it a few days later. So it's critical that we ensure that the communication is effective and not just a communication. Have your policies changed? A lot of you have got COVID-19 policies as well as your quality, your health and safety and your environment policy. Do they need to all be put into one? That's entirely up to you. But equally, they must be communicated. So your staff need to know about it. You might want to communicate it to your interested parties. It goes back to, again, people are wanting quite a transparency of how is your business dealing with COVID and would I be safe or allowed to come and visit you? We've spoke a bit about the risks and opportunities, but what we didn't speak about was whether they're suitably prioritised. So those that are key must be addressed so that people can return to work safely, and those that are nice to have can possibly wait until later. So if you've got a huge building, we go into lots of premises that have got lots of empty rooms, you have an opportunity to ensure perhaps that lots of people can work in a room on their own and keep people safe that way. A risk, of course, might be if you have got smaller premises, but the opportunity again might be to save on overheads by allowing people to work from home. And thus, if you're certified to environment, of course, you can start monitoring emission reduction, hopefully, and so on and so forth. Has the strategic direction changed? And has this changed altered the goals and the objectives? So changes must be clearly communicated once they've been finalised by top management. Also, who's going to own the objectives? And again, when must they be completed? How do we measure it? And how do we ensure that responsible parties have the resources that they need to realise them? So it's a consistent theme. If you're going to tell us you're going to do something, then by all means, pop down whatever objective you like, but we must be able to see they're communicated, you own it, and that you're measuring it, and whether it was successful or not. Business continuity should be considered. And might include lessons learned from remote working. So hopefully if you're in leadership, you might have monitored costs that you're paying out for your buildings or your utility bills and see, is this something that could be considered for the future? So we've got a green one. How has any shutdown impacted energy usage, and have energy baselines been reviewed? Lots of people on the environment audits have said that it's been a fantastic experience to monitor these, and they can't believe actually how much shutdown has impacted on that. Are there any new environmental aspects and impacts, and has the significance of existing impacts changed frequency and likelihood? So if you've got 14,001, it's a really good idea to go and review. Some of these may not be relevant anymore, but if you're requiring people to wear PPE and maybe you require a clinical disposable should this be added onto your aspects and impacts? You may need to find a completely new waste disposal company. It's down to you, of course, to find all of those answers out, but at least you can show your assessor that you've considered these things. Do you have any new compliance obligations? So it might not be a legal requirement, but it might be applicable from a trade association or a customer. So again, you, of course, as part of controlling your suppliers and how you approve them, you may find that other people are doing the same, and you may, when you get the pre-approved supplier questionnaires through, find that there are more stringent requirements from your customers of things that you need to do. So are you complying? Has the new legislation been suitably identified and considered and actions taken to ensure compliance? I think I'm going to help you out in a couple of slides with that, because we've sort of put something together for you, save you going on a big route round. Has compliance been ensured to all existing legal requirements? So compliance with an environmental permit, it's important to go back and review and ensure that what was in place is still relevant. There's not been any changes. Statutory inspections for things such as lifting equipment and pressure safety systems. So we know that there was a 3-month extension put on these, similar to MOTs and what have you. That time's quickly running out now. So if you haven't already booked it in and your equipment has expired or is close to expiry, then it might be a good idea to make that as one of your priority risks that we spoke about. If goods and services are being supplied internationally, have you identified any new compliance obligation for countries into which they provide them? So if, like NQA, you're global, you have quite some work to do perhaps, particularly in terms of border control and how other countries, their expectations, quarantines and so on and so forth. So it's worth looking into that if you do ship outside the UK or into. Has the organisation suitably risk assessed their working arrangements both on-site and remote before returning to work? So another critical and legal requirement, ensure that your risk assessments are up to date and ensure that they have been understood and updated and revised as and when there's a change. I've just spoke about that. So have they been documented, communicated and effectively deployed? And was the workforce consulted during this process? So we mentioned earlier about how it can be beneficial to get staff on board and find out what you're scared about, what do you want us to do, what's the expectation. We can sort of potentially class this as a consultation if they're bringing up safety matters, and for you to present them with your answers to what you found to help keep them safe. Arrangements for visitors to site, how will suppliers and subcontractors coming to the site be managed? So a lot of places have done drop-off deliveries, they're not accepting delivery notes or not accepting visitors at all. It might be a case that when we spoke about policies, there might be a policy for me to read if I come and visit you, and a new procedure, whether I need PPE to provide my own PPE to come to you, not as an assessor, but as a general visitor, and that communication appointment only perhaps. It's a good idea to consider that, and have we documented it? So here's government guidelines. This will hopefully be quite a useful slide for you. So if you're unsure what changes there have been, we've covered hopefully, yeah, so we've got UK, Scottish, Welsh, Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland. So hopefully this will give you a little bit more information, and of course you've got your own time to look through and see if there's anything you're missing. There's also, for health and safety consideration, a variety of information which the government's prepared for and given guidance to, and I think that's what most people are basing the bones of their risk assessments on, what the government's telling us to do, and then sort of expanded on that to make it their own in their own business by looking at the other aspects you would expect to find within a health and safety risk assessment. We also need to consider RIDDOR. So for COVID-19 contraction due to occupational activities, now considered a RIDDOR. Have you reported it? And are you measuring it? What mitigations are you putting in place to ensure people don't catch it? So it might be temperature, it might be random checks, however you want to do it, and however you've come to determine that's what you need to do, which would be risk assessment, I would say. Waste management guidance has changed. So we've provided the guidance for the COVID for health and safety. This is where you want to go for the environment guidance and updates. And if you have a look through those, it will give you the latest up-to-date information. We've also done a blog as well, which you can get on In Touch, I believe, and that will keep updating as well. So Section 7 support, who's going to be returning? Will it be a phased return or will remote working continue? So we've already talked about, we'll have done a risk assessment for this. Have you got effective channels of communication? Changes to be made within your organisation should be clearly communicated both internally and externally as needed. And has the organisation's infrastructure been changed? So as a health and safety matter, this could cover such things as social distancing and may involve new ways of working, such as one-way systems, staggered breaks and smoking arrangements as well. So it's quite, your risk assessment shouldn't really be a small document. When we consider this, there's quite a lot to go through. We need to consider, have they got the competencies they need for new work practices or conditions? Do we need additional training? How will the training be delivered? So it might be the case that you do a virtual one now rather than assist in a classroom or a toolbox talk, and what resources are needed to do that. Has information security and physical security arrangements been reviewed accordingly? Sufficient PPE and hygiene products available and being used. So again, you might notice a theme that have we provided these things? You're going to tell us potentially that you have. We'll want to know, how do we know if they're being used? How do we know if it's understood? How are people aware? And of course, it comes back to leadership responsibility as the accountable one for the systems to ensure that you can provide this evidence for us. Big one, so health and being arrangements, dealing with stress and anxiety of returning to work and possible bereavements for family and friends. So I mentioned earlier, you might decide to have a temporary support person in place, dependent on their experience and training in those matters. You might decide it would be worthwhile to appoint a mental health first aider. Obviously, if you've had furloughed staff, as brilliant as that was in terms of the support the government's provided to businesses and people who went on furlough, it won't have gone without its own pressures, because obviously they've lost, in most cases, 20% of their pay, which in turn would have brought its own problems. So you may find there are a lot of stressed people, and coming back to work and throwing them straight in it might not be the best answer. You'll need to consider calibration of devices that haven't been used. So again, as part of your internal audit, your statutory inspection material and any devices and equipment for calibration might be a good place to start, and check your forklift trucks, so on and so forth. If you've not been using your machinery, we might want to confirm your pre-use checks. So your emergency stop and guard checks up to date? Have you tested the equipment if it's been out of use for a while? Will restarted your processes produced any special waste or emissions, and how will these be managed? So this again, once you've sort of calculated perhaps that before shutdown we had X amount of waste and emission, during shutdown we had this hopefully reduced waste and emission. Is there any way that you can probably not have the same emission as when you were shut down, but improve it? Now we know that it can be done. We don't have to create as much waste. Operating on an environmental permit, any conditions relating to shutdown or startup been satisfied? and special arrangements in place for storage of waste relating to COVID-19. Regulatory bodies have given exemptions in short term for the attendance at site of technically competent personnel, and exemptions have also been granted for the duration and volume of waste not being held on site. You also need to think about how and when will processes, products and services be validated following startup? Do your customers have special requirements relating to the validation of products and services? How will projects that were in place on hold during shutdown be restarted? And how will the new arrangements affect the performance of manufacturing processes or service provision that could affect production rates or staff coming into contact with clients and members of the public? You might also want to check if there's new requirements for products in terms of packaging and labelling, or if international deliveries have been affected and delivery times. So again, we look at the resource sort of factors on the supply chain. The deterioration of products may be worth, so if you've got something with perishables or expiry dates on, good to do a little stock take and see, have we lost anything? Again, it's part of performance monitoring and measuring, isn't it? So we'll need to see if we've made a loss through stock perishing with there. Okay. In terms of internal audits, everything that we've spoke about covers all of these areas. And in order to do a really effective internal audit, again, it's worth going through this checklist, if you will, adding these areas onto your audit plan or within the criteria for your audit, so that you're asking quite thorough questions and finding that thorough evidence as well. Applicable meter readings, have they been taken before startup? Timeframe monitoring and reporting of emissions under environmental permits have been relaxed during the COVID-19 outbreak. So hopefully after we've done all that and we've done management review, business should be as usual, and we're going to make improvements where you deem them necessary or possible. So the final thing I'm going to talk to you about really briefly is the COVID secure guideline verification. So the purpose of it really is to build trust and support risk management in supply chains with consumers and wider stakeholders. So whilst we spoke earlier about we're all passing risk assessments between us to show that we've assessed risk, and some are very thorough, some aren't particularly thorough at all, and not the best. It's how do you inspire confidence in your customers, in your staff, that you have done everything possible. What we came up with was an idea that we could perhaps do an independent verification to provide that confidence. Basically, what that verification does is state that on a given day, the site has specific demonstrable measures in place to satisfy the government guidance applicable to their sector. So the benefits that we've identified for that are that it will mitigate or reduce the risk of transmission, demonstrate a duty of care, reassure your employees, reassure your customers, and a positive PR. So if that's something that you're interested in, by all means get in touch with NQA and we can direct you to the right person to provide a quote for you. So you'll get all of this with the slides as they come out. They're all quite wordy, so I'm not going to read it all out for you. But it's all surrounding really the government guidelines. It might give you a little idea of the sort of things we'd be looking at if we were to come out and do the COVID verification for you. And it might help you come to a decision on whether you'd be ready for that. So to return to work safely, this isn't an exhausted list. There might be other elements of your business that require some attention. Ensure government guidance is followed along with all applicable legal requirements. Good luck with returning to work safely, and we look forward to working with you all soon, and check in as well that hopefully you've taken on board what we've discussed in this webinar. Thank you very much for listening, And if there's any questions, I shall have a look now. Okay, so I have got a question. Clause 8.2 ISO 45001 states emergency prep. How can you test this in response to unusual issues, including a pandemic? That's a brilliant question. Absolutely fantastic. So I think what we need to consider in terms of how we test it in terms of the pandemic, when we're looking at emergency preparedness and response, we're looking at the obvious issues, aren't we, to start with? Totally agree with that. Is it going to be a fire, chemical spill causing injury, or what have you? We always look for the most obvious disaster to prepare for. I think what we would have to say now is we now know there's a global pandemic. There are industries which will have already had this on their list as something to prepare for, obviously. And it might be the case that you need to sort of show training for PPE. You need to perhaps, I know in the medical field, doctors have training every few months on how to wash their hands effectively. So to nurses, it sounds a very basic function, but in some respect, although it's an ongoing training, it's preparedness of what happens if you're touching loads of things and people without gloves, and how bacteria spreads. So that's one way that you could do it. I think the question that you have asked is fantastic, and I am going to possibly pass that over to Terry Fisher, who's our principal assessor for it, because he would possibly have some better answers than myself, if I'm honest. So thank you very much for that. Thank you. Right, emergent. Right, if we could see it better. Bear with me. So emergency and preparedness to be triggered when there is an employee who is COVID positive. Okay, so again, when it comes to your own risk assessment, and it depends what industry that you're in. Obviously, if you're in a food or medical industry, then it's going to be a different response to what you would have if you're elsewhere. Again, I'm going to pass that over to Terry Fisher. That's quite a detailed question. That's good. Smashing. Okay, that's all the questions that I can see. I'm going to close the webinar now. Thanks very much for attending, and thank you for listening. Any questions that you've got, will Terry come back to us on those points? Yes, he will. You'll get an individual response, and they are such good questions. It's quite possible we may ask him to do something a little bit further on that. He may have covered it in one of his health and safety webinars, but I'll get that checked and we'll get back to you. So thank you very much, and hopefully see you 21st of August at 2 o'clock for Leadership and Planning Part 2. Thank you.